Hello. Today we're going to make a fresh tomato and fresh ricotta tart. We're going to use puff pastry. You can see this is store-bought puff pastry. This is an excellent brand. If you want to be adventurous, you can make your own puff pastry. Just know that that takes a lot more time. This is right out of the freezer. You let it thaw in the refrigerator for about an hour or so, and then it's ready to go. So we're going to use one sheet. This has one sheet of puff pastry. I made some fresh ricotta cheese. Store-bought is fine. Just make sure you use a good quality ricotta cheese. I have tomatoes from the garden and also some that I purchased from the store that I like, but just use any tomatoes that actually taste of tomato. So this is definitely an in-season type of item. You're going to need a rolling pin. You're going to need some basil. We're going to use that to top everything off. A little bit of salt. Always need to put a little bit of salt. A little bit of granulated garlic. I use granulated garlic instead of fresh garlic because garlic can turn green. It's still delicious. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not very eye appealing. And you'll need parchment paper, very specifically parchment paper and not wax paper. The parchment paper is going to go on our sheet pan. It's going to be how we're going to be able to move our tart around. So let's get started. Okay, so first things first, I've cut a piece of parchment. It doesn't have to be pretty, and I've placed it on my sheet pan. Next, we're going to take our puff pastry out of our container here, and we're going to open that up. This is a clean surface. You'll see that you can actually put flour down. I personally find that there's, on these prepared puff pastries, there's more than enough flour. Can you see that? More than enough flour to go around. It actually can fall off. So I put the floured side down, and although this is a square, I like to make sure that these creases are going up and down. So you're going to take your rolling pin, and with even pressure from the center, you can hold on to the handles. I'm used to using my hands on top. I feel like I can get more even pressure that way. Okay, so I went from the center up and from the center down. And I'm going to turn it 90 degrees. I'm going to do this again. And I'm going to do this until I feel like it has, it's large enough to fit on my cutting board. And by turning it each time, I'm making sure it's not sticking to the surface of my counter. If you find that it's sticking, you can go ahead and add a little dusting of flour, but not too much. All right, so turn that 90 degrees. And you'll notice that my hands are on it as I go backwards. I have no pressure when I pull it back until I get to my center, and then I pull it back evenly. And even still, you can see I haven't done a very good job there, so that's going to be my next stop, is to get that to even out a bit. So let's get this part up. And from the center down. I'm going to turn it again. I'll work on getting this side. So I'm going to put a little more pressure on this side. Do you see how it evened out almost immediately? So you have to feel your dough. Baking is much more precise than just cooking savory meals. So this is a lot of the feel. Okay? I'm going to turn it one more time, and that's going to be my last turn. Come on, little one. There we go. Being careful not to poke a hole in it. And if you look very, very closely, you'll be able to see the little dots of butter that are in these sheets when you do this on your own. So just open that up. And you can actually roll this out on your parchment. You might find that to be easier to do. I'm just going to finish that off here. Don't want to have any wrinkles. I'm just putting my hands underneath to make sure it's not stuck anywhere. I'm going to do one last even out. Okay, now I have my oven on bake at 400. So I'm going to take this whole thing very carefully. You can use your rolling pin for this, just like you do a pie. Roll it onto your pin. Put your sheet pan down. And then roll it out. So what you're avoiding by not picking it up is the possibility of tearing. Let's fix this a little bit here. There we go. So now we're ready to actually do the next step, which is called docking. Now you can use a knife and create an edge all the way around. I happen to use a fork, and I'm just lightly pressing in. I'm not going all the way through. And by leaving the edge undocked, that will puff up, where this center part will not puff up. And I do that because this is where the filling's going to go. So I'm kind of systematic about it. And then I'll come back, and if I think I need more of an edge, I will, if I need less of an edge, I will add more holes with my fork. So if you happen to have a docking tool, by all means use that. It's a rolling pin with little tines on it, essentially. So I'm going to make my edge a little bit thinner on this, so putting a few more docks there, and I'm going to do the same thing here. All right, there you go. So now we're fully docked, as it were. So the next step, I'm just going to move this off to the side for a moment. As I showed you, I made my own fresh ricotta cheese. You can use store-bought cheese, it's fine. But this is ricotta. I'm going to put a little bit of salt in there, because I know I didn't add salt to mine. So if you're going to add salt to your store-bought, make sure you taste it. I'm also going to add a little bit of granulated garlic, because I like that flavor. Not too much, because it is powerful. Now you could add an egg in here. It will tighten this up a bit more. I happen to like it like this. Okay, you can see I'm not going to call it runny, but this is not a stiff ricotta cheese. All right, so that's going to be our first item that we're going to add. So I'm going to take spoonfuls, and using the back of my spoon, everywhere where I have docked, I'm going to make sure there's a nice little layer of ricotta cheese. You can add more, you can add less. That's why I didn't give you an amount here. But basically, I have nearly 2 cups for this one sheet. I like the ratio of cheese to tomato to puff pastry that I get when I do this. So there we go. Trying to cover up all the places where I've docked it. And if there's any left over, you don't have to use it if you don't want to. You can eat that all on your own if you'd like. All right, so just going to spread this out evenly. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to try and get it as even as you can, so every bite tastes the same. So here we go. Almost done. All right. So now that we've got our ricotta cheese down, we're going to add our tomatoes. Now, one thing I want you to know is you could blind bake this before you put the ricotta cheese on if you would prefer. And once that's done, then you can do these steps and just serve it with this not cooked. I happen to like everything to be cooked. So I've sliced up our tomatoes. Most of them I've just taken them and sliced them in half, because I like a good bit of tomato flavor. And then for others, I've sliced them the other way around so that, you know, we get a little bit of variety in how they look. And I'm just randomly putting the tomato on. But the thing that you're going to want to make sure that you actually do is that you put more tomato on here than you think. Because the tomatoes, because we're going to cook it, they are going to shrink a bit. So while it's going to look crowded when I do it, I bet you anything by the time I'm done and we pull this out of the oven, one of my first comments is probably going to be, I could have put more tomatoes, because that's always my first comment. It's still delicious no matter what. So I'm going to add all of my tomatoes. And I have a lot of them. And if you've cut more tomatoes than fit on your tart, don't worry about it. You can have a nice tomato salad. Nothing will go to waste here. This is all good stuff. Now, if you're making this out of season, just make sure you're getting tomatoes that have flavor. In season, that really shouldn't be a problem. You want to make sure your tomatoes are ripe but not overripe. So they should hold their shape. It's like this guy's holding his shape. They should hold their shape a bit. And that way when you place them down, they are not mushy. All right, so we're getting all our tomatoes in there. I only have one of these beautiful golden tomatoes, so I'm saving that there. I have the little pear ones. And yes, it looks crowded, doesn't it? But I am actually going to put every last tomato that I have in this bowl into this tart. And if you want to get artistic and create a tomato scene, knock yourself out, I find that when I pull this out of the oven, it doesn't last long enough for anyone to appreciate any of my artwork. Not that it's very good, mind you, but it disappears very quickly. So yes, it looks like I'm putting too much. I have like 3 or 4 more pieces to add, but you're going to see at the end, this is all going to look almost sparse when I'm done pulling it out of the oven. So we've got all our tomatoes on, and I'm going to put a little, very little drizzle of olive oil. Very little drizzle. I know I didn't mention that in the beginning. You don't have to do this step. I like having a little drizzle of olive oil. I'm also going to put a drizzle of salt. And a drizzle being, I want to bring out the flavor of the tomatoes themselves. Afterwards, I'm going to put a little bit of balsamic glaze on it. So now this is going to go in the oven for about 20 minutes. So let's get it in there and see how it turns out. Let's have a quick look at our tart. See how it's puffing up here on the edges? It's got at least another 3 or 4 minutes to go, but it's almost ready. All right, here we are. Our tart is ready. We're going to use the parchment paper, quite literally, to just pick it up, put it on our cutting board. So finishing touches for this. I've taken some basil and I've cut it up. This is a chiffonade. Just cut that up. You can add as much or as little as you'd like. I happen to really enjoy how these 3 flavors go together, the cheese, the tomato, and the basil. I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes to cool off before I fully cut into it. You can probably see the steam coming off of it. You see that's a lot of basil, but it's really good. And then my last thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of balsamic glaze. Again, the acid from the balsamic with the sweetness, it's just something I really enjoy as a flavor. So not too much, just enough. So I encourage you to try and make a tomato and ricotta cheese tart, especially if you've made your own ricotta. But remember, store-bought is fine. Store-bought is fine for the puff pastry. In fact, I recommend it. And try it, because that's delicious.